Lake Camp in New York. Yeah. All right, so let's welcome Brian Mitchell. Thank you.
Okay. So I apologize, I don't have a cool PowerPoint presentation, so unfortunately you'll have to look at me or close your eyes for most of my presentation. Closing your eyes is not the worst thing to do. So thank you for that introduction. Thank you for inviting me here this afternoon. First of all, Shabbat Shalom. I will follow Ms. Ahmad. Is that correct? Ms. Ahmad's introduction. She said something in her native language. I will say Shabbat Shalom, which is what we as Jews say on our day of rest, our Sabbath, which is until sundown. So I would say Shabbat Shalom, and you would say it back to me. So Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Very good. You're on your way to be Jewish. Okay. So, as I said, I'm honored to be here this afternoon. As my introduction stated, I've only been here a year. Actually, next week I will have been here for one full academic year, and it's flown by. I have worked for several Jewish professional organizations. This is my first time on a college campus. Most of my background has been working with Jewish overnight summer camps, which is kind of a big deal. I actually grew up at a summer camp, and that's how I kind of formed my Jewish identity and learned most of what I know about Judaism today from my summer camp experience. But in my first year here on Missouri's campus, I've spoken on several panels. I feel like I'm getting asked on a weekly or monthly basis to speak about Judaism because I guess they think I'm an expert, which I'm in no way an expert about what I'm about to talk about. I actually have to do a bunch of research to prepare for this afternoon's presentation. So if when we get to the question and answer time, if I can't answer a question, I apologize because I am not a rabbi, even though I was at a panel. Maybe someone was at the panel. It was early first semester, and there was a Muslim student organization student sitting next to me, and he actually came in late, and he had missed my introduction. And after I finished my introduction, he spoke, and in his introduction, he looked at me and said, "Oh, I assume the rabbi to my left would agree with me." And I started laughing, and I said, "I'm sorry, but I'm not a rabbi." But for the rest of the presentation, everyone had to refer to me as Rabbi Brian, but I won't make you do that. So, it's just so interesting to be sitting in these panels because, like I said, I've been with a bunch of Muslim student organization representatives, and I've learned so much. I have been to Israel probably between 8 and 10 times. I'm actually lucky enough to be able to lead young adult trips to Israel. There's an organization known as Birthright, which is something that was set up to actually, well, I'll talk about it a little bit later on, to further the Jewish religion, because we are definitely a small minority of the world's population. But Birthright trips consist of young adults between the ages of 18 and 26 who are Jewish, who have never been to Israel before, can apply for this 10-day trip experience, and it's a free trip. And so because I actually was a Birthright participant a long time ago, and I know I don't look that old, but I'm older than I probably look. And so I've been to Israel, plenty of times, and most of that journey is dealt with learning about, obviously, Jewish heritage. But in Israel, I will, I've been to mosques, and we've also set up part of our trip to learn about your faith. And so it's fascinating. Now I've probably learned more in this year, being around Muslim student organization students, than I have in my very many trips to Israel. So I've learned so much. We have a lot more in common than I ever thought. And I wish people could kind of see what I've learned this year, because especially those that are struggling living side by side together in Israel, because what I've learned is that we have much more in common than we do, not in common. So, like I said, I'm honored to be here. As I said, I'm in no way an expert about what I'm about to talk about. There are 2 rabbis in town, actual rabbis, who have earned the title of rabbi instead of from someone sitting next to them. And so any question that I cannot answer, if we get to the question and answer phase, I can point you in the right direction of 2 rabbis who actually live in town, who will be able probably to answer your question, or you can ask me the question and I'll get the answer from them and get it back to you. So I'm going to begin. I actually wasn't going to do this, but in looking at Ms. Ahmad's presentation, I'm going to start off with a movie reference also. Has anyone seen the movie Keeping the Faith? Yes, raise your hand high. Okay, great. So I'm only talking to a few, so if I screw up the plot line, I apologize. Keeping the Faith is actually a great movie about what I'm about to talk about. It's set in probably sometime in the mid-2000s. It stars Ben Stiller, Edward Norton, and what's the actress's name from Dharma and Greg? That's it, Jenna Elfman. Great, very good. So, some people have seen it. So Ben Stiller plays a rabbi. It's set in Manhattan, New York City. So Ben Stiller plays a rabbi. Actually, so it begins where these are three lifelong friends growing up in New York City. And you see them as children, so actually children actors playing these famous actors later on. And so it just shows them, all three of them, two boys and a girl. Ben Stiller is Jewish, Edward Norton's character is Christian, and I believe Jenna Elfman's character is Christian also. I'm not really sure they really talk about it. I know she's not Jewish. Basically, the whole point of the story is that she's not Jewish. So the three of them they show in the first 10, 15 minutes of the story, spending every waking moment together. The three of them are just, they're pals. They're a trio. They go everywhere together. And then the movie fast forwards to later on in life in their young adulthood. Ben Stiller studies to become a rabbi. Edward Norton becomes a priest. And Jenna Elfman actually moves away as a child. Her character moves away when she's very young. And so these boys lost their best friend, but they stay friends growing up together in New York. And one becomes a rabbi, one becomes a priest. And I feel like there's a joke coming on here. Priest, a rabbi, and Jenna Elfman. So the story continues. Jenna Elfman is this, high-profile, very powerful woman, I believe living on the West Coast, living in California, and she comes back to New York City for something work-related. I'm not really sure what her job is, but she's pretty powerful in what she does for her career. And so she comes back, and she hasn't seen these two friends of hers since she was 8, 9, 10 years old. And so this is now, she's in her probably late 20s, early 30s. And so she enters back into their lives. She contacts both of them to say, hey, I'm coming back into town. I'd love to see you. And so obviously when she arrives, when we last saw her, she was, a young girl, cute girl, but, young. And now she's Jenna Elfman, who, as many people would say, is a very attractive woman. So she shows up, and obviously Ben Stiller and Edward Norton's character are smitten right away. I mean, they see her when she gets up. There's a scene of her coming off the plane, and you guys know the scene that I'm talking about in there. I mean, their jaws, or there's drool coming from their mouth. And so she spends time in New York, and they reacquaint each other. They get reacquainted, and they spend a lot of time together. And there's also the backstory of Ben Stiller's character, who's a rabbi, who's a single rabbi at a very large congregation in New York City. And so for those of us who have Jewish mothers and Jewish grandmothers, it's kind of a big deal who you're going to marry, for a Jewish boy at least, and probably a Jewish girl. I keep looking at Kayla. Kayla just waves so people know Kayla is. Kayla's a very involved student in Hillel, and she's here to learn and also support me and correct anything that I get wrong. So it's a big deal. You're brought up in a Jewish household. What Jewish girl are you going to marry? Nowadays, it's not really just your mother or grandmother, your buddy, who is pestering you. And I will say that I get it all the time. I am currently single, and I'll talk about my family, not because I'm trying to pick up. Like it goes with the story, because I'll talk about my sister, who actually is in an interfaith marriage right now. And I don't think when Taha invited me to speak today, probably didn't even know that, but I can actually speak from experience. So it's a big deal when you have your family members, who are pressuring you. There's a lot of pressure in Jewish households of who you're going to marry when you grow up. But nowadays it's even more pressure, because there's the internet and Facebook, and now there are Jewish online dating sites. Do you have the same? For those of you, are there the same? There's JDate, which is this big thing online. I don't know if you've heard of it. Is there like a M-Date or do you guys have that? Okay. So for us, it's a big deal. It's spoken about all the time. So there's a lot of pressure. And so back to the keeping the faith. I'm digressing. So Ben Stiller's character is getting a lot of pressure, especially as a rabbi, a single rabbi, from all of his congregants. I mean, he's getting set up. All of the mothers who have Jewish daughters in the congregation are trying to set him up with their daughter, because he's a catch. But then you've got Edward Norton's character, who's a priest, who obviously has made a life choice to be celibate and not go down that path. And of course, we'll fast forward the story. Ben Stiller's character and Jenna Elfman's character fall in love. And so, they're messing around. They're having fun, basically, in New York City while she's there working. And it's a big pressure, and they're keeping it secret from Edward Norton's character. I'm sorry that I'm going into all this, but it makes sense in the end. So they're keeping a secret from Ed Norton's character because they don't know how he would react. But on top of it, Ben Stiller's character, he's a rabbi. This is a lot of pressure on him, that he is falling for someone who is not Jewish. He's got a very Jewish mother who is pressuring him, and he's also a rabbi of a very large congregation in Manhattan. And so he doesn't know how his congregants would react to him falling in love and marrying someone who's not Jewish, someone that's not part of his faith. And him being a rabbi, he's the symbol of his faith, right? A rabbi, I mean, not me, but he is someone who his congregants look to him to set the example, to do for him to do what he wants them to do. So the story continues. He's grappling with it in his mind, whether he should continue just having fun or if he should actually allow himself to fall in love with this woman. The story continues where they end up having an argument because she's ready to make that commitment and he's not. He's not ready to actually kind of really go against his faith and marry someone who's not Jewish and be part of an interfaith marriage, which is why we're here today. See, I told you I was going to come back to it. So they break up in movie time, probably 3.5 minutes. In real time, who knows? A few days. But his friend Edward Norton's priest character finds out. And I actually recommend seeing this movie. It's highly entertaining. And to make a long story short, which is probably way too late, Ben Stiller's character and Jen Elfman's character do fall in love. They get back together, and it's actually this is a story that probably a movie that would not have been made any time before the 1990s or 2000s. And I'll talk about kind of how interfaith marriage was looked at in the past. But what I'm about to talk about, I promise you, if you go see the movie Keeping the Faith, you'll learn way more than what I'm about to inform you of. So basically, that's a commercial for seeing Keeping the Faith. It's probably at every Blockbuster or Netflix or any video store. So, to talk about where interfaith marriage is, actually let me back up a little bit because I'm going to be talking about using terms that you may or may not know. I'm not trying to insult anyone in the audience, but whenever I give these presentations, I can understand Judaism being a very small minority of the world's population. Usually I start off my presentation by saying, raise your hand if you are Jewish, and usually I see like one hand go up besides mine, and then I will continue. All right, raise your hand if you know someone that's Jewish. And speaking to most of the students, classes that I've spoken with, if you're from suburban St. Louis or suburban Chicago, like a lot of Missouri students are, undergraduate students are, they will say that I'll see a few more hands go up. But if you're not raised in a suburban population like St. Louis or Chicago, and I'm going to put Kayla on the spot, and she's not going to like this, but Kayla, where are you from?
I'm from Fulton, Missouri, so it's about 20 minutes away. It's very rural.
Okay, so how many Jews did you know growing up in Fulton, Missouri? One. Okay, so in being on Missouri's campus, which again is a big state school, there's the balance of people that, I can say that in my science class as a junior in high school, 95% of the class was Jewish, and this wasn't a Jewish high school, whereas Kayla, living in Fulton, Missouri, an hour and a half away from where I grew up, completely different world. And so whenever I speak to groups like this or anywhere on campus, I give a little background of Judaism, and again, it's not trying to be insulting. I just want to make sure that you understand the words that I'm talking about, and I should have had a cool PowerPoint presentation so you could see the definitions, but you'll just have to settle with me talking about it. So in Judaism, what I find great about Judaism is there's very many ways to practice Judaism. There's not if you were to talk to an Orthodox Jew, which I'll talk about in a second, if you were to talk to one sect of Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, they would say that their way is the only way. And they are definitely not the majority of Jews living in the world right now. And you might recognize an Orthodox Jew by someone, there's actually an Orthodox Jewish family, I know of one, that is living in Columbia, Missouri currently, but these are people who Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, which is what we read from on a daily basis. That's how they lead their life. There are Jewish laws that their life revolves around. And so if you're an Orthodox Jew, your way of observing Judaism is the way. There is no other way. Now, as I said, that's probably the minority of the Jewish population in the world, and most of Orthodox Jews live in Israel. And they study Torah all day long, and they live their life by how the Torah tells them to live. Now, because the reason that I have a job and the reason that I'm able to practice Judaism the way that I do is because that to other Jews that are not Orthodox, there are many other ways to observe. We're a pluralistic religion that believes in one God, but the way that people practice Judaism is entirely up to them. Now I'm going to talk about a few sects, S-E-C-T-S. I was speaking to students and I said the word sex and they all giggled. So now I make sure I spell the word out, sect of Judaism. And so there's Orthodox Judaism that says this is how you practice. Anyone else that doesn't do it this way is not doing it the right way. Then, and I'm going to talk about the three most popular sects of Judaism. There are others that are in between, but if you know these three, you pretty much know most Jews. Conservative Judaism, it's middle of the road. It will tear towards Orthodox in some respect, and it will kind of tear below or towards the bottom, I don't want to say rung, but the least observant of the Jewish population, Reform Judaism, which I'll talk about in a second. So conservative is middle of the road, that will follow some Jewish law, but maybe not all of the Jewish laws that there are. And I think, as I say Jewish law, there are over, and Professor, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe over 600 Jewish laws, if I'm not mistaken. 613, I knew there was a number. So Orthodox Jews follow all 613. Conservative, I'm not going to give you a number, but definitely not 613, but not zero. Okay, so they're middle of the road. And then you've got Reform Judaism, which I identify myself as. That's how I was raised. Usually most Jews identify with the sect of Judaism, how they're raised, until they are a certain age that they become an adult. And in the Jewish religion, you become an adult when you are 13 years old. It's a ceremony called a bar or bat mitzvah, where you are called to the Torah. You read the Torah for the first time in front of a congregation, your family, your friends, and then you have a big party and you give gifts afterwards. But that's not the most important part of it. So when you become an adult, then you can make your choice of whether if you would like to stay in that sect of Judaism, or when I see students every day who are, they're struggling with their Jewish identity. Maybe they want to be more observant, or maybe they grew up and went to Jewish day school and maybe were a little too observant, and now they're able to kind of grow and be independent and maybe figure out what path of Judaism they want to follow. So Reform Judaism, I don't want to say bottom rung, and I don't want to say it's like the hangers-on, but Reform Judaism, is, to give you an example of a difference that you would see between Reform Judaism and Orthodox Judaism. On a Friday night, if you went to an Orthodox temple, this is our Sabbath, our Shabbat service, you would see at an Orthodox temple, probably all men, and you would see a male rabbi who is basically reading from the Torah, reading from a prayer book, and leading the service, and not really leading, just kind of standing in front of everyone, and the whole service would be in Hebrew, the language of the Jewish people. At a Reform service, you might see a female. Actually, it'd be very common to see a female rabbi. You might see music being played. You might see someone playing the guitar. So Reform Judaism came about to try to bring those people who didn't want to be as observant and follow all 613 Jewish laws, try to bring them into Judaism. And I actually might mention it later on, Reform Judaism is actually the one sect that is gaining population among the Jewish population of the world, whereas conservative and Orthodox are kind of losing. And that has to do possibly with the subject that we're here to talk about today, interfaith marriage. So now we can actually talk about interfaith marriage. We ready? Okay, this is where my presentation takes a nosedive. So I did some research this week, and I learned that interfaith marriage is mentioned in the Torah. It's actually in, in Deuteronomy, where it says, "You shall not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, for you will turn your child away from me to worship other gods." So basically what it says, I'm sure there might be more mentions to it, but this is like the number one mentioning of interfaith marriage, meaning Jews should not marry because their children will turn to other religions. That's what the Torah says. So we've talked about the sects of Judaism. I want to talk about how each sect views interfaith marriage, because they're very, very different. So we'll start with Orthodox Judaism, which we talked about earlier. Obviously, you can assume Orthodox Judaism views interfaith marriage or intermarriage as wrong. And I've also, I did some research this week, and I found out that they sometimes refer to intermarriage, and this is a very powerful quote, and we as Jews don't usually throw this term around in comparing it, but I actually read this, that they look at intermarriage as a second silent Holocaust. And obviously, those of you who know the Holocaust to Jews was, in fact, last week was Holocaust Remembrance Week, and the Holocaust Remembrance Day happened last Thursday. 6 million Jews perished in the Holocaust. And for us, for Jews at least, to use that word in comparing it to anything means it's a big deal. We can use that word. I'm not sure if you should use the word, but we use that word. Orthodox Jews will use that word, saying that intermarriage because children will not be raised Jewish, and it's basically decreasing the world's Jewish population. And I think we're less than 1% of the world's population, definitely less than 1%. So, we're unfortunately we're a dying breed. So we'll talk about conservative Judaism. Conservative Judaism, it discourages intermarriage, and you'll see the differences, as I explained earlier, between Orthodox Judaism and conservative Judaism and Reform Judaism. But conservative Judaism discourages intermarriage, although it is more open to the approach. It once was looked at as an act of rebellion or rejection to Judaism. A young adult who just didn't want to be Jewish anymore and didn't want to follow that path might rebel and might say, "Ha, Mom and Dad, I'm going to go marry a non-Jew." Let's see where it was. All right, so it was an act of rebellion, but that was in the past, but it now might be looked at of living in a more open society. Obviously, and I'll give statistics in a bit, but this was not very common long time ago, but it's now obviously becoming more common. Hence movies like Keeping the Faith, and keeping Ben Stiller in a job. It's in the conservative movement. It's not looked at as a celebration of the Jewish community, but obviously they're not totally against it, but they won't celebrate it. What conservative Judaism hopes is that in an intermarriage, obviously the couple will maintain the Jewish identity of the partner who is Jewish, whether it's the male or female. And hopefully raise their children as Jews. So conservative Judaism basically will say, okay, if you want to marry someone that's not Jewish, by all means go ahead, just raise your children Jewish. Maintain the identity of whoever is Jewish in the partnership. That will agree with. Okay, so now we'll talk about Reform Judaism, which again is the way that I was raised and what I'm most familiar with. And again, I have a sibling, a sister, who is, I guess, a product of an interfaith marriage. So Reform Judaism, as you can assume, does not have firm rules against intermarriage. But I'm not going to tell you that you won't see a commercial on TV for Reform Jews saying, "Hey, go marry a Christian." It's not like they're promoting it, but they're definitely not totally against it at all. Reform rabbis, so a rabbi who is at a Reform congregation who went to a Reform. There are different rabbinical schools. You can go to a conservative seminary or a Reform seminary to become a rabbi for that sect. But Reform rabbis are not under any kind of discipline for their choices interpreting Jewish tradition. They can do whatever they want. They consider themselves Jewish, they are Jewish, they've gone to a Reform seminary. They can, like I said, do whatever they want. They have the choice whether to accept and officiate an intermarriage wedding ceremony. So if an intermarriage couple-to-be approaches a Reform rabbi and says, "Will you officiate our, as in the case of my sister?" Our Reform rabbi said, "I would be happy to." That probably would not happen in a conservative temple, and definitely not in an Orthodox temple. A Reform rabbi might view intermarriage as a contribution to a multicultural society that enriches lives, and opposition to that would be probably not in the congregation's best interests. Okay, so that's how the most popular and populated sects of Judaism view intermarriage. So let's talk about kind of where intermarriage has come from the past, and we're talking about long ago, hundreds, thousands of years ago, to the more recent day, the present day that we can remember, and some of us more than others. So in the past, Jewish intermarriage, again, very rare. This is because Jews lived among other Jews. There were Jewish societies, and so if you were Jewish, you only knew other Jews. You weren't assimilating with Christians or with other faiths because you only lived among other Jews. Has anyone, and again I'm going to reference another movie/musical, has anyone seen Fiddler on the Roof? Yes, Tevye. I can't do it that well. So matchmaking used to be a big deal, and kind of still is with J-Date and my grandmother and my mother. But in matchmaking, where you had your mother, and actually this does happen in Orthodox Judaism, where a male and a female will be matched together, and they might have one or two meetings, and they go on their way. So that was another way that Jews were guaranteed to marry other Jews. Again, we're talking about the past. But when there was intermarriage, it was very rare, and as I spoke about earlier, it was used only when a Jew rejected his or her religion or his or her heritage and sought to assimilate into Christian society. And in response, the Jewish community would disown these intermarried Jews. They're not us anymore. And this also happened when Jews were forced to convert, like during the Spanish Inquisition, or Jews were forced to become Christian, and so that's when intermarriage would happen. So, as I said, very rare in the past. Now let's fast forward to present day. It's very, very common. A stat that astonished me, but didn't really, that approximately 1 of every 2 American Jews is married to a non-Jew. So half, we're just talking about American, okay? American Jews, half of American Jews are married to someone that's not Jewish. My sister is contributing to that. This is a result of 2 different things. First, American Jews living in an open society, as I said earlier, where they are more likely to meet non-Jews, obviously. We're a small population, so not unfortunately, but I spend most of my time around people that are not Jewish than are Jewish, because that's just the world that we live in. And also because in present day, American Jews are being less educated about Judaism and their Jewish heritage, leading to less connection to it. I guess it would be considered a problem in the Jewish world right now that adults, when they become old enough to make choices on their own and obviously get married and raise their children, don't feel a connection to Judaism. Whereas a lot of temples, Reform and Conservative, are losing membership. Even though I said earlier that Reform Judaism is raising in population because more Jews are wanting to practice Judaism the way Reform Jews do, but there's not as much of affiliation to a synagogue or to a temple in your community as there once was, because children aren't being raised going to Jewish day school or being brought up by their parents as Jewish and practicing Judaism, rituals, holidays, and whatnot as once happened. Not many Jews even receive education after they're 13 years old. When you become bar or bat mitzvah and you become an adult in Jewish life. And Kayla, I'm going to put you on the spot again. Were you bar or bat mitzvah?
No.
Okay.
My brother, though, is having his July 14th.
Okay, so Kayla's brother is about to become an adult in the Jewish religion, and then once you become an adult, I know it's kind of weird that you're 13 years old and become an adult. It's not like he's making choices on his own. I'm sure he'll still be living at home under his parents. Yeah. But when he becomes an adult, and when he then becomes a little older, he will make a choice whether he wants to continue his Jewish education. I actually, after I became bar mitzvah, I stayed at my temple and I became confirmed, which was I stayed in religious school for, 3 years after my bar mitzvah, and I went through a confirmation ceremony. So I continued my education, but those numbers are dwindling. Not many Jews will continue their Jewish education post 13 years old, and that's, again, sadly becoming more common. So they're not knowledgeable about their heritage. Okay, so just to answer a few questions, Taha, I'm not sure if he's still here, just sent me a few questions to answer, and then hopefully you won't ask me questions later. Actually, I'll digress a little. Let me talk about my sister, because, like I said, I'm a perfect example of an interfaith marriage. And I will say, very tough on my mother, my Jewish mother, and my Jewish grandmother who was living at the time. That my sister fell in love with someone and was actually living in rural Iowa. She actually graduated from Missouri's journalism school, and her first job was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And she met a man who wasn't Jewish from Iowa, and fell in love with him and decided to marry him. And I think my parents, it's great because they've paved the way for me. She paved the way for me, but I think they struggled for a bit of time, wondering if she should be making this choice. I don't think it was as much of a struggle as it was for Ben Stiller's character as a rabbi and his mother, who lived in New York. Obviously, if you don't know, New York Jews are a lot different from St. Louis Jews. But after grappling with it, my sister decided, this is the man that I fell in love with. And being raised in a Reformed Jewish household, my mother and my father were okay with it. What I always tell people, because whenever we go to Israel, there's a spot that we always go to where there was a place in our history where Jews were forced to assimilate and live in Christian society. I forget the name. Sipori. Has anyone been to Israel? Okay, great. Wow. Okay. So Sipori was a civilization where Jews, thousands of years ago, were forced to live in a Christian majority. And we always have this conversation. It comes up. What do you think? And I'm, again, traveling with 40 young Jewish adults, most of which are not married and are just becoming of age where they're making choices about their future. And we always talk about what are your views on interfaith marriage. And so I always give my views, because obviously I'm definitely not against it. And what I use as an example is my sister, because as I explained earlier, we Jews, Orthodox Judaism, will say, we're not in favor of interfaith marriage because of the children not being raised Jewish. And so my sister and her husband-to-be obviously had this conversation well in advance of the day that they were walking down the aisle. They knew that they were going to have children, and they knew they were going to raise their children, and they made the choice, and they talked about this, because had they not talked about it, this is not a conversation you want to come up 5 years into marriage when you're about to have your first or second child. I think my sister did it the correct way, and they decided that they wanted to raise their children kind of both, which I'm not sure I completely agree with, but at least they're giving them I'm not sure, I put on my notes that it might be a watered down version of raising your children Jewish, so I'm not sure I completely agree with that, because when they become old enough to make choices on their own, which direction are they going to go? How confused are they going to be? Because my nephew is going to be bar mitzvah next summer, and I know I was in St. Louis visiting them a few weeks ago, and it was Easter Sunday, and my brother-in-law took him to church. So when he becomes old enough, is he going to be confused? Which path is he going to want to choose? And we won't know that until he is old enough. And so right now, I don't think they're having questions over dinner, what do you believe in, Ben? 12 years old, so I don't think he's at the age yet, but who knows what happens when he's in college and what path he wants to follow, because I think that's going to be very confusing for him. But that's the choice they wanted to make, and so I believe interfaith marriage can work. If you were to talk to, again, pluralistic way of looking at Judaism, if you were to talk to a rabbi or someone else that's Jewish, they might completely stand up here and disagree with me, but I'm trying to give you one view, my view, and why I feel, like I said, it might be contributing to the Jewish population of the world, diminishing to a point where who knows what our percentage will be, but I believe because of the open society that we live in, it's almost unavoidable. And I have friends, not myself, who are on J-bait all the time. I'm not sure that is the correct way in this day and age of how you should be meeting your partner for life. So just to kind of sum up, to give you a few stats. Here. Any questions? I guess we're going to do questions at the end. Just to kind of sum up hopefully what I explained, and I hope I didn't bore you. So Jewish intermarriage is common in America today, with approximately, like I said, 1 in every 2 American Jews married to a non-Jew. Just so you know, in Jewish faith, if your mother is Jewish, you're considered Jewish. So if your mother was raised Jewish, if her mother was Jewish, then she's Jewish, and that means you're Jewish. Okay, so there are obviously people that will convert to Judaism. I actually was part of a presentation with a very well-known rabbi who said a converted Jew, there's no such thing as a converted Jew, because you can convert to Judaism, there's a lot that goes into it, but a converted Jew is someone you're a Jew. There's no such thing as a converted Jew. There are Jews that might want to leave, as I said earlier, leave Judaism, but if their mother is Jewish, they are considered Jewish. And what does that mean, considered Jewish? Obviously, Israel is the homeland to the Jewish people. You get certain rights and certain benefits for being considered Jewish. If you are an American, or if you're a non-Israeli and you would like to move to Israel as a Jew, it's called making Aliyah. If you are Jewish, it's a lot easier for you to make Aliyah because your mother was Jewish. As I said, intermarriage today, as opposed to intermarriage in the past, is generally not a deliberate rejection of one's Judaism or Jewish heritage, like it used to be. You're going against your parents, but nowadays it's a lot more common. As I said, it's rare among Orthodox Jews because Orthodox Jews will give their children intensive Jewish schooling. The attitudes of non-Orthodox American Jews toward intermarriage are becoming more accepting. So with that, I think I went 12 minutes, so thank you for your attention. I'm happy to point you in the direction to answer questions later on. Thank you.